For some time now, I felt like something's been watching me, tracking me, observing my behavior. I never saw it. It was always just out of sight, in the corner of my vision, waiting for me. Or waiting for me to slip up and do something wrong. It went on for months, and the paranoia I originally felt at home followed me to work as well. I would feel eyes boring into the back of my head, never blinking or ceasing its vigilant watch. I would feel two bony hands with abnormally long digits creeping up my back, clutching at my clothing, but it'd always disappear when I turned around, though the paranoia never ceased. It eased up though, and I began to feel more comfortable at work. My living at home, on the other hand, worsened. Shadows would dance along the wall, twisting, writhing, emaciated figures swaying to some rhythm that I couldn't hear. But chief among them was a towering figure, easily standing at 7 feet tall and with a silhouette that looked like he wore a hooded robe. He never moved, never swayed, always looking straight at me. The spot where his eyes should have been glowed a deep orange, and they never ceased their piercing glare. His shadow would appear in the same place every night, always on the wall facing my bed. When I decided to move the couch and sleep there, I awoke to his shadow looming on the wall, always watching, observing. It felt almost like protection, save for the way those embers set deep in his shadows squinted with malice. Just as I had begun to grow accustomed to my new house guest, the whispering started. At first it was near incomprehensible and almost impossible to hear. Those nights were easiest, when the sounds were mere murmuring and not prophecies or warnings or paternal words that would normally be soothing. Then it escalated to the hoarse sighs and groans of agony, each sound of pain coming from one of the shadows, but not his. They would curl and writhe about, sometimes bleeding like lambs led to their slaughter. It was disturbing, but not nearly as much as the silence from the great, tall figure that always stared at me. I awoke one morning to knocking on my front door. One of my neighbors, a young man in his early 20s, told me that he was losing his mind. He never got any sleep, he confessed, because of the whispering around him when the sun set. I was alarmed, as well as relieved to know that I was not the only one suffering from this insomnia. I told him that I would allow him to sleep on my couch tonight if he so chose. He agreed. It was a grave mistake. In the middle of the night, I heard a pitiful whimpering before the twang of a taut cable and a quiet crack forced me out of bed. I felt bile rising in my throat as I took in the scene of my neighbor's demise. He'd punched 2 holes through the ceiling and ran a cable through both of them, tying one end to the standing piano I kept in the living room. The other end was wrapped around his throat, his corpse swaying in the slight breeze from the ceiling fan. His eyes had rolled back into his skull, exposing the gruesome spider webbing of the capillaries running through his sclera, blood dripping from the left corner of his mouth, staining the beige carpet a deep maroon. Surprisingly, the susurrates and silhouettes had all vanished, replaced by the bleating of sheep and quiet sobbing, a sound that didn't come from my own lips, but was too close to be anyone not in the room. I spent far too much time absorbed in the hanging body in my living room, for my senses finally registered the whispering had begun anew, accompanied by a new voice amongst the others. It was a deep, raspy voice, one that didn't come from outside, but rather from inside my head.
"Hush now, child,"
he whispered into my thoughts, soothing and terrifying me in equal measure.
"All shall be well. Now go back to sleep."
Suddenly, as if coerced by a powerful entity, I felt exhausted. I attempted to make it back to my bedroom, but slumped forward, bruising my knees as I blacked out. Sleep was restless, and just as bad as when I was awake. I dreamt of crimson skies, the sunset darkened out by clouds of smoke billowing up from a distant metropolis, the skyscrapers bleeding black against the blood-red atmosphere. I saw bodies everywhere, corpses mutilated past recognition, staining the grass a grotesque shade of brown, the blood refusing to mix with the vegetation. Standing amidst a great pile of bodies was the silhouette that so frequently haunted my bedroom wall. This time, he was no longer merely a shadow. He wore a black hooded monk's robe, and his face was masked with the skull of a ram. In his hands he carried a gnarled black staff, the end twisting around in a coiling mass of thorns. His eyes glowed a deep amber behind the mask, the only thing of his face that showed through the oculate mask. He beckoned me forward, reaching out his hand for me to take, like I was a small child that needed to be supervised. I felt compelled to take his offer, and so I did. He led me to the top of the hill constructed of broken radios screaming static. He outstretched his hand towards the metropolis that I had seen earlier, and for the first time I saw that the streets had been flooded with a sea of blood. The current swept along cars and debris, and strangest of all, the bloated bodies of sheep. A mixture of satisfaction, terror, and disgust swept over my emotions as I gazed out at the scarlet ocean.
Can you swim?
I suddenly realized that he was speaking to me again, through some channel of telepathy. Just as I opened my mouth to speak, I felt him pick me up by the hair, remarkably silent as he hurled me over the edge into the red current. I splashed in head first, writhing in the rip current that pulled me into a clearing in the city. I felt a tendril on my ankle and let out a silent scream in the water, twisting and kicking to try and escape the creature's grip. The inky gray and blue-green tentacles dragged me deeper and deeper until no light shined down in the depths. I found myself face to face with a horrifying teal eye that was wider and taller than 2 human heads laid end to end. It looked me over, as if searching for something before wrapping several more tentacles around me. The extra tendrils pulled my limbs, spread eagle, tearing my limbs from their joints with ease. As blinding pain became numb with lack of oxygen, I slowly drifted further into the deep abyss. I awoke, sweating and terrified, afraid of the possible prophetic prediction in my nightmare. I took a glance outside and realized that there must have been a morning solar eclipse, for the moon had blotted out the sun's light. I heard a knocking upon my door and, gathering my courage and wits, I proceeded to answer it. Just as I was about to give greeting, I realized that the woman I was about to speak to had something off about her. Her form was slouched and slack. Her mouth hung agape and her eyes glimmered with a red light. I took note of the symbol etched into her neck with ink. It looked like a V, with the upper 2 points curling outward and around themselves. Aries, I thought to myself, remembering what I had learned from my astrology-obsessed mother. I was about to close the door when she grabbed my arm, forcibly popping the joint from the socket and eliciting a holler of pain from me. I stumbled out into the throbbing mass of bodies, each one walking as if they were a zombie with the scarlet eyes glimmering in the dim light. The throng pushed me forward, forcing me to a location where a tall figure stood, looking down at me. I suddenly realized that this was the same man from my dream, the one who had so easily gotten me to bend to his will without a single hitch or problem. 2 of the marked people held me still as the man, the shepherd, lifted his ram skull mask up, revealing his scarred lips. They had vertical lines on them that looked as if they had been cut or burnt. His mouth opened and I heard a breath leave them, colored red and gold and citrine as it curled and wisped through the air. The glowing wisp traveled through the air and into my nose, and suddenly everything was clear. I was just a worthless liar, nothing but a heretic who had to be brought to the light. The shepherd was there for me, leading me towards the real truth, helping me and guiding me along to the promised place of rest. The neighborhood must have been emptied of souls, for the streets were packed tight with the bodies following the tall figure of the entity, the herald, the harbinger, for it was our duty to follow him anywhere. We were mere sheep who didn't understand the wrathful nature of the world, and so he protected us from ourselves, and we, in turn, would obey him mindlessly and follow him wherever he went. It was our duty, for he was our shepherd.